When you are young, recovery is so efficient that it almost feels like part of the natural background of life. You stay up too late, work too hard, lift something heavy, catch a mild illness, or go through a stressful week, and the body somehow restores itself with surprising speed. Soreness fades, energy returns, sleep repairs what strain disrupted. You do not usually think of this as an achievement. You simply call it normal. That is why the first signs of decline are often so disorienting. They do not usually arrive as catastrophe. They arrive as delay. A long walk lingers in the legs. A poor night of sleep poisons the next day instead of merely touching it. Stress leaves a residue that does not clear by morning. A minor illness drains you for longer than it should. Exercise still helps, but the recovery after it becomes part of the cost. What once passed through you now stays with you, and that is when recovery, which used to be invisible, becomes personal. At first, the shift seems minor. Most people notice this before they can explain it. They may not know anything about inflammation, mitochondrial efficiency, protein synthesis, or hormonal regulation, but they know the feeling. The body that once reset itself quickly now negotiates. It asks for more sleep, more time, more caution. It does not return to baseline as easily. The old confidence begins to fracture, not necessarily because you are in constant pain, but because you begin to sense that the body is no longer repairing itself in the background with the same quiet generosity. That change carries an emotional sting that is easy to underestimate. Recovery is not glamorous. We rarely admire it when it works, but when it weakens, something intimate is exposed. You realize that much of what felt like strength was actually the body's ability to absorb damage and restore order without asking for your attention. When that ability slows, the ordinary friction of life becomes harder to hide. Effort costs more. Mistakes last longer. Even small disruptions feel heavier because they are not cleared away with the speed they once were. This is why slower recovery can feel like betrayal, not because the body has suddenly turned against you, but because it has stopped protecting you so silently. It used to cover the consequences of strain before you ever had to face them. Now it lets you feel them. The soreness remains, the fatigue echoes, the reset takes longer, and once that begins, it is hard not to ask a deeper question. What exactly is recovery? What hidden work was the body doing all those years that made resilience feel effortless? And why does that work become slower, more expensive, and less precise with age? Those questions matter because recovery is not just a fitness issue or a matter of comfort. It is one of the clearest early signs that the body's relationship to stress, damage, and repair is changing. What feels like not bouncing back is not a vague complaint. It is the visible edge of a deeper physical process already underway. The word recovery sounds passive because from the outside it often looks passive. You lie down, sleep, sit still, cancel plans, take a day off, and it appears as though healing is simply what happens when activity stops. Effort ends, rest begins, and the body quietly returns to normal. But that picture is deeply misleading. Recovery is not the absence of work. It is work you do not see. Every time you strain yourself, through exercise, illness, emotional stress, lack of sleep, injury, or even ordinary exertion, the body is pushed away from equilibrium. Muscles accumulate micro-damage. Energy stores are depleted. Stress hormones rise. Inflammation is triggered. Waste products build up. The nervous system shifts into states that are useful for short-term survival but costly when prolonged. What you experience afterward as fatigue, soreness, irritability, heaviness, or mental fog is not just being tired. It is evidence that the body has entered a period of active reconstruction. That reconstruction is extraordinarily complex. Damaged proteins have to be broken down and replaced. Muscle fibers must rebuild where they were strained. Glycogen stores need to be restored. Inflammation has to be controlled so it helps repair without spilling into unnecessary damage. The immune system must clear debris. Hormones have to rebalance. The autonomic nervous system has to move away from high alert and back toward restoration. Blood flow, temperature regulation, hydration, and cellular signaling all have to be coordinated with astonishing precision. None of this is automatic in the lazy sense. It is biological labor. Sleep is one of the clearest examples. People often speak of sleep as if it were simple shutdown, but in reality, sleep is one of the busiest repair periods the body has. Memory is consolidated, hormonal rhythms are adjusted, tissues repair, immune function is recalibrated, metabolic balance is restored, the brain itself clears waste more effectively during sleep than during waking. When you wake refreshed, what you are really feeling is the success of a vast reconstruction project completed mostly outside your awareness. The same is true after exercise. What feels like bouncing back is not the body flipping a switch from tired to restored. It is a repair and adaptation cycle. Tissue damage must be resolved. Fuel must be replaced. Inflammatory signals must rise and fall in the right rhythm. New proteins must be built. The nervous system must recover its efficiency. If all of this goes well, the body not only returns to baseline, but sometimes comes back stronger. That is what adaptation is, successful recovery with improvement. This is why the phrase "just rest" misses something essential. Rest matters, but rest is not the mechanism. Rest creates the conditions under which the mechanism can work. Recovery itself is active, organized, and metabolically expensive. The body must spend energy to rebuild the capacity that previous strain has disrupted. And once you understand that, one fact becomes unavoidable. Recovery feels easy in youth not because less is happening, but because the hidden machinery is faster, cleaner, and more efficient. Aging changes the quality of that machinery. The work still happens, but with more cost, more delay, and less precision. What once felt like effortless restoration begins to feel like negotiation because the body is reconstructing under harder terms. That is the reframe this section must make. Recovery is not a gift the body hands out. It is an achievement produced by millions of coordinated processes holding damage, stress, and disorder within manageable limits. When those processes work well, you barely notice them. When they begin to slow, you feel every missed step. A younger body often rebuilds before you realize how much rebuilding was required. An older body cannot hide that effort so easily. And that is why the next question is why the machinery doing recovery gradually loses speed. Once recovery is understood as reconstruction rather than simple rest, the next question becomes unavoidable. Why does that reconstruction slow down with age? The answer is not that one switch flips and the body suddenly becomes old. Recovery gets harder because many systems begin losing speed, flexibility, and precision at the same time. The body is not dealing with one dramatic failure. It is dealing with a gradual shift in balance. Damage rises, repair slows, and the margin that once made resilience feel effortless begins to narrow. Start with inflammation. In youth, inflammation is often sharp, useful, and temporary. It appears where tissue is stressed, infection threatens, or repair is needed, then resolves with relative efficiency. But with age, the body becomes more prone to prolonged low-grade inflammation. This does not always arrive as obvious illness. It can exist quietly in the background, changing the environment in which recovery must take place. A system already carrying inflammatory load responds to new stress with less elegance. What should resolve quickly can linger. What should remain local can spread. Recovery takes longer because the body is no longer returning from a clean baseline. Energy production changes too. Mitochondria, the structures responsible for generating usable cellular energy, tend to become less efficient over time. That matters because recovery is expensive. Rebuilding proteins, restoring ion balance, clearing waste, controlling inflammation, repairing tissue, and returning the nervous system to a calmer state all require energy. If energy production becomes noisier, slower, or less flexible, then recovery does not stop, but it becomes less generous. The body can still do the work, yet it does the work with less surplus. Fatigue lasts longer because the system restoring you is itself under greater strain. Protein synthesis also changes. Muscles, connective tissue, enzymes, receptors, and structural components of cells depend on the body's ability to build and replace proteins accurately. In younger people, the response to training, strain, and injury is often quicker and more robust. With age, that process becomes less responsive. Tissue can still adapt, but it often requires stronger signals, more time, and better recovery conditions to achieve the same result. This is one reason soreness lasts longer. Strength returns more slowly, and time off has a larger cost than it once did. Hormones contribute to the story as well. Recovery depends partly on the balance of signals that regulate stress, growth, sleep, appetite, inflammation, and repair. As those signals shift with age, the body becomes less able to move cleanly between states of exertion and restoration. Stress can stay elevated longer. Sleep may become lighter or more fragmented. Anabolic support for tissue maintenance may decline. The result is not just feeling older, it is a body that must repair under weaker coordination. Then there is accumulated damage. This may be the most important idea of all. The body you are asking to recover today is not the body you had 20 years ago, plus more time. It is a body already carrying the consequences of prior strain, prior inflammation, prior metabolic stress, prior injuries, prior sleep loss, prior illness, and countless microscopic failures that never fully announce themselves. Recovery gets harder because the body is restoring more while being able to restore less. It is working on fresh strain while standing on older wear. Even the nervous system changes. Recovery is not only about muscles and tissue, it is also about whether the brain and body can move out of prolonged alert and back into a state where repair is possible. As stress accumulates and regulation becomes less flexible, people can remain activated longer after effort, conflict, or poor sleep. That means less energy available for deep restoration and more energy spent holding the system together. So the physics of decline begins to show itself biologically. Slower recovery is not laziness, weakness, or a lack of will. It is what happens when multiple repair systems lose a little efficiency at once, while the amount of damage needing repair quietly rises. You do not merely need more rest because you are older. You need more recovery because the body is repairing under heavier conditions with fewer reserves and with less precision than before. And once that is clear, the meaning of recovery changes again. It is no longer just a personal inconvenience. It becomes evidence of a larger law. Every strain pushes the body toward disorder, and every recovery is an energy-costly attempt to rebuild order before too much is lost. At first, recovery seems like a medical issue, a matter of muscles, sleep, hormones, and age. But underneath all of that sits a deeper physical truth. Every time you strain your body, you create disorder. Not chaos in the dramatic sense, but local disruption of structure, balance, and function. Tissue is stressed, energy is spent, waste accumulates, inflammation rises, signals shift. Stable patterns are disturbed. Recovery is the body's attempt to reverse that drift and restore usable order before the disruption spreads too far. That is why recovery is never free. To heal, rebuild, calm, and rebalance, the body must spend energy. It has to move materials, synthesize proteins, clear damaged components, regulate immune activity, restore chemical gradients, and return systems to a workable baseline. In physics terms, recovery is a local act of order-making. It pushes back against the natural tendency of stressed systems to become harder to manage. The body does not simply wait for disorder to disappear. It works against it. This is where the language of entropy becomes useful if we handle it carefully. Entropy does not mean everything gets messy in a childish sense. It refers to the tendency for energy to become less available for useful work and for organized systems to require constant effort to maintain themselves. A living body survives by resisting that drift. It takes in energy, uses it to preserve structure, and continuously repairs the disruptions ordinary life creates. Recovery is one of the clearest places where that resistance becomes visible. When you are younger, the body often performs this resistance with remarkable efficiency. You strain it, and it rebuilds. You lose sleep, and it restores. You get sick, and it reorganizes itself back toward health. The labor is real, but the reserves are deeper, the signaling cleaner, the repair more flexible. The body can spend energy to rebuild order without making the cost feel obvious. Aging changes the cost of that struggle. The body still resists disorder, but less efficiently. Energy production becomes less generous. Repair becomes less exact. Inflammation becomes harder to resolve cleanly. Damage accumulates in the background, so every act of recovery becomes more expensive. The same disruption now requires more time, more coordination, and more biological effort to contain. What once felt like a brief detour becomes a prolonged negotiation. This is why slower recovery should not be interpreted as simple weakness. It is evidence that order is becoming harder to restore under the same conditions. A poor night of sleep is no longer just tiredness the next morning. It is a larger disturbance entering a system with less flexibility. A hard workout is no longer longer just a challenge followed by adaptation. It is damage, inflammation, and energy demand imposed on a body that must rebuild with narrower margins. Stress lingers because returning to balance now costs more than it once did. In that sense, every recovery is a small battle against the body's drift toward disorder. The soreness that remains, the fatigue that lingers, the heaviness after illness, the way stress echoes longer than before, all of it reflects the same deeper fact. Restoration is not passive. It is expensive resistance. And as aging changes the efficiency of the systems doing that work, recovery becomes one of the clearest places where the physics of decline becomes personally visible. Once you see that, recovery stops looking like an inconvenience and starts looking like something more serious and more worthy of respect. It is the body spending itself to pull you back from disruption. The question then is no longer why you cannot recover like you once did. The better question is how you should live when recovery itself has become a more fragile achievement. Once recovery is understood as a real biological achievement rather than a vague feeling of bouncing back, the emotional meaning of getting older begins to change. You stop seeing slow recovery as a personal insult and start seeing it as information. The body is telling you something honest. It is telling you that restoration now costs more than it used to, that strain leaves a deeper mark, and that resilience is no longer something you can assume without thought. This realization can feel disappointing at first, but it can also become clarifying, because the goal is no longer to recover like your younger self. That goal is emotionally tempting, but biologically misleading. A younger body often had larger reserves, cleaner signaling, faster repair, and less accumulated damage. Trying to force the current body to behave as though none of that has changed usually creates more frustration, not more strength. Wisdom begins when you stop treating the older body as a failed younger body and start treating it as a different system with different recovery rules. That shift does not mean surrender, it means strategy. A body that recovers more slowly must be managed more intelligently. Sleep becomes less negotiable because the margin for repair is smaller and the cost of disruption is greater. Movement becomes more important, not less, because circulation, strength, metabolic flexibility, and tissue health all support recovery when practiced consistently and within realistic limits. Nutrition matters more because repair requires raw materials, not just calories. Stress regulation matters because the nervous system cannot recover well while it remains trapped in prolonged alert. Pacing matters because repeated overload without sufficient restoration can quietly turn effort into accumulated decline. This is one of the most important lessons aging teaches, even if it teaches it reluctantly. Intensity is not the same as progress, and exhaustion is not the same as accomplishment. In youth, the body can often survive misuse and still recover impressively. Later in life, the bill arrives more clearly. What you can do still matters, but so does how you recover from doing it. Rest days stop being signs of weakness. They become part of the work. Going to bed on time stops being optional discipline and becomes repair protection. Gentle movement, hydration, sunlight, food quality, strength maintenance, and emotional steadiness all become less like wellness cliches and more like tools for preserving the body's shrinking but still precious ability to rebuild order. There is dignity in that adjustment. A great deal of unnecessary suffering comes from fighting the wrong battle, trying to prove that age has changed nothing, pretending recovery should still be effortless, treating limitation as humiliation. But the body does not ask for denial. It asks for better terms. It asks for respect. The slower return of energy, the longer healing time, the extra day needed after strain. These are not merely losses. They are reminders that repair is happening under harder conditions and deserves greater support. And perhaps that is the final comfort available here. Recovery is not gone. It is more fragile, more expensive, and more demanding, but it is still one of the body's quiet miracles. Every time you come back from illness, rebuild after effort, recover after stress, or simply wake feeling steadier than you did the day before, something remarkable has happened. Order has been restored again, at least for a while. So no, you may not recover the way you once did, but that does not leave you powerless. It leaves you responsible in a deeper way. You recover more wisely by living with more rhythm, more patience, and more respect for the hidden labor your body is still performing on your behalf. That is not defeat, it is maturity shaped by biology. And perhaps real strength, later in life, is not found in pretending the body has not changed, but in learning how to protect its recovery with the seriousness it has always deserved.